Okay, thank you so much, Paul, especially driving, adding that really useful set of comments to the presentations today. I just wanted to also point out, so for those of you who aren't used to teaching online and aren't spending 5 to 6 hours a day in Zoom, the chat is open for your use, and putting things in there while people are presenting is most definitely not considered rude or off task. So please feel free to throw thoughts, comments. You can even probably put an emoji in there because there's a little reactions button. So, feel free to express yourself during that. And I really appreciate everybody who's done that so far. And so I'm going to actually turn the sharing on right now. So I got a bunch of mess going on here. Here we go. And I'm hoping that everybody is seeing my slides here. It's the one with the face that matches this face.
Slides are good, Marcia.
Okay, great. Okay, so before I begin, I just wanted to do a quick walkthrough of what's in your packet. And so if you haven't gotten the packet, I reposted the link to the chat, but certainly can send it to you directly. So there's, of course, a copy of the agenda and the executive summary of the project. We did include a list of Bloom's verbs because we're going to be talking a lot about verbs. And so we thought you might want to refer to that. And yes, we're going to be talking a little bit about parts of speech. We're not going to get into the weeds of grammar. No, don't worry. And then we have a copy of all the slides that David and Faye and I are going to be presenting today. And then a few papers that our graduate students have produced relating to these analyses. We just thought you would want to see those. And we hope you find these items helpful. So, okay, well, I think the overarching question that this project is trying to answer is, are we teaching what they want in advanced manufacturing? But I want to pause for a second on the word we. So as you probably concluded from David's introduction, the FSU team is composed of information scientists and research methodologists. So we are not SMEs in advanced manufacturing. So we're essentially working with you to do an arm's length analysis, and we leave it to you to do the interpretations. So if I'm not coming out of this presentation telling you what you should be doing, that's because it's not really my place. You are the subject matter experts, and we're sharing our findings with you. And just in the same way that Margie did such a fantastic job of taking those findings and figuring out how she could use them to take a fresh look at curriculum, that's certainly what we encourage all of you to do, depending on your perspective on advanced manufacturing. So what would a research project be without research questions? And we have 5 for this project. Today, we're really going to focus on research question 1, because we're looking at competencies and how they compare to the needs of employers. Now, we do have a couple of research questions that we are working on the analyses for right now. They were a little bit hamstrung by COVID and some other slowdowns, but we have completed interviews with new professionals, with faculty, and with employers. And now our job is to take those transcripts and analyze them in the same way that we did the syllabi. And then research question 4 is really part of what we're hoping to accomplish in events like this, where you work with us to talk about ways that curriculum could be modified to more closely meet the needs of employers and what new professionals are being expected to do on the job, because that's an often forgot about element of the whole equation. And then research question 5, which has really been the focus of the Chipola team, is figuring out how to keep these treasures of advanced manufacturing technicians successful and in their local communities in order to strengthen the entrepreneurial and intrapreneurial possibilities there. So I think I mentioned various parts of this slide before, excuse me for knocking something over, that we've done an in-depth syllabus analysis. We've also completed faculty interviews, and for all of you who participated in those, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate your time more than you could possibly know. We've done analyses of internship postings and job postings, and we've done new professional interviews, which has meant tracking down alumni. And so for those of you who helped us with that, again, we really could not be more grateful for all the help that you've given us in connecting with alumni, because we know that is tricky business, and a lot of it is very word of mouth, and we have to, you know, just kind of find people as we find them. Nonetheless, we did. And we also took a look at the curriculum frameworks. Now, they're parenthetical because, as we'll talk about, the curriculum frameworks are a point of departure, not a destination. So that's something else that we looked at. And of course, we interviewed many employers. So as you're probably concluding, even if you've not been in the weeds of this project, you know that that is a whole lot of data. And so we've been churning through it to see how the perspectives compare and how they align, because I think the goal of the program leaders at all 5 of our partner colleges is to make sure that there is a nice close triangulation between what's happening in the classroom, what new professionals are expected to do on the job, and what employers expect their employees to know and be able to do. So this is just kind of in 3 years what we have accomplished, and we certainly haven't accomplished it alone. It's been everyone really helping us make this happen. And certainly, as you saw, there's been a fleet of expert graduate students on this work as well. So just a quick reminder about the FLDOE curriculum framework. And so we think of that as the point of departure, because we know you all developed your programs in close reference to the CTE curriculum frameworks, and the figuring out how well your programs align to the curriculum frameworks wasn't going to be a very interesting question, because our working assumption is that they do. But what we're more interested in is the extent to which things kind of get a little bit drifting in what employers need, because that's very dynamic, that's very of the moment, and there's simply not a way for curriculum and curriculum frameworks necessarily to keep up with that. And so that dynamic nature of advanced manufacturing really requires us to look at employers' perspectives regionally, and that's another emphasis I want to have here, is that we were looking at this region, and that's not necessarily something that the frameworks were designed to capture. However, we got a little surprise along the way. So you'll hear me use the term body of knowledge and competency model kind of interchangeably up to a point, and I'll be explaining why. But we had a little surprise as we went through just in this last year. And I mean, who doesn't love a midstream change, right? So we were relying on the Department of Labor competency model to represent the view of employers. And if you look at how the competency models, if you go to that Career One Stop website and look at how the competency models are created, they are created with employer input. And the Department of Labor defines a competency as skills, knowledge, and abilities and other factors that are essential to successful performance. And so when our analysis was almost complete, in January 2020, the Department of Labor released a new competency model, which we were so excited to see, as you would imagine. This new model improves skills transparency for a deeper workforce pipeline, this is what they say, and allows job seekers, training, and training providers and employers to have greater alignment and efficiency in recruiting, training, retraining, and upskilling talent in US-based advanced manufacturing. Well, we'll see about that. But as this slide shows, there are some interesting differences between the two models. And so we went through and we picked out, and in the afternoon packets, there's actually the document that the Department of Labor published that points out the key differences between, it's a summary of the differences between the two models. And that's available on the Department of Labor website. And so if you've not had a chance to look at the 2020 model yet or review that document, that's definitely something you'll want to take a look at. And so the key difference is that there are some things that they definitely retained. Of course, we still have the same pyramid with the same basic labels. It's what's inside the pyramid. And so there were some improvements, such as talking about health and safety skills, making the language more inclusive of personal worker differences, and also including the electronics and semiconductor industry. So getting a little bit more view of more current industries. So back to the idea of body of knowledge. And so you'll hear me use that term body of knowledge, or BOK or BOK, today interchangeably with the Department of Labor competency model. We view the competency model as a foundation for a body of knowledge in advanced manufacturing. And we intend to augment the contents of this competency model with the additional competencies we identify through the interviews and through the other data points that we're using. Okay, now we're starting to talk about parts of speech, folks. And so if we work with that original definition from the Department of Labor of what a competency is, then it must be composed of a topic and an action. So you have a noun and a verb that can be measured, because a competency is something that can be measured, and maybe that's binary, yes, no, person has it, the person doesn't, or level. They can be entry level, developing, mastery level. So a few different ways of looking at competencies. And so Bloom's taxonomy, and some of you probably haven't really had to use Bloom's taxonomy on a daily basis, but it was created and is being sustained as a way to help educators focus on the verbs that make the competencies measurable, and making sure that students are applying the topics or operationalizing the topics at the appropriate levels of complexity. And so that's why we focus on the nouns and verbs that are stated on syllabi as part of a competency. And so you'll hear me say outcome and competency interchangeably today too. So let's just take a quick overview of what our syllabus analysis process looks like. And so first we extracted nouns from what we call the slow pose, the student learning outcomes and the program/course outcomes listed on the syllabi. And so we analyzed 145 syllabi altogether from our 5 partner colleges. And we're not going to delve too deeply into that today because we're still anonymizing the topic parts of the results. We'll look a little bit at it this afternoon, the partner colleges will. So we spend a lot more time on verbs, calculating the extent to which the overall program outcomes verbs match the Department of Labor competency model. And then we look deeper into the individual courses. And we do this process in 2 steps because a program may have a strong match, but all that match could be in elective courses, which would mean that the program leaders may want to consider shifting competencies from elective courses to core courses. So that's why we do it in 2 steps here. And the process we use to do this is we do text mining, of course, for the text documents. And now, because we're starting to analyze transcripts and compare them to the text documents, we're verging into a computational linguistic approach. And we have made all of our code available through GitHub. So if this is the kind of thing that you're interested in, please let me know and I will direct you to the GitHub and you can have a look. So let's move to high-level findings. So let's see what we've got here. We have individualized reports for each of the partner colleges to share this afternoon, but there are definitely some high level findings that might be of interest to everybody here. Okay, so first let's look at the Florida Department of Education AM curriculum framework, because that's a document everybody is very familiar with, and the differences between that and the 2020 competency model. And so what we can see in these illustrations here is that in the curriculum framework, slightly over 50% of the verbs belong to Bloom's applying category. And again, you have that handout in your packet if you want to refer along to it. And also, just a quick review, the bottom level of the pyramid is remember, then second is apply, understand, third is apply, and then the top level, the most sophisticated level, is create. So just remember, remember is number 1, create is number 6, and apply is number 3. So that'll probably help you. So 50% of those verbs are in the applying category, compared to 30% of the verbs in the AM competency model. So there are more applying verbs in the curriculum framework, which actually makes sense, that there are lower level verbs, remembering, understanding, and applying, that are prevalent in both documents, but the percentage of higher level verbs increased in the 2020 competency model. And so if you're thinking about the use of each one of these documents, one is for learners, and the other one is for people entering or in the workforce. You would expect those people to be functioning at higher level of sophistication in the workforce. And so in terms of the verbs used within Bloom's category, the AM curriculum framework has an increased variety of lower level verbs compared to the competency model, as I mentioned, but the opposite is true for the competency model, where there's a greater variance of verbs. And so they use more different kinds of verbs. And so there are categories, 6 categories, yes, but as you can tell from that handout that you have, within each category, there are many different verbs represented there. And so what this comparison that we're looking at on this slide tells us is that overall, the curriculum framework's verbs are at a lower level, but as I said, that makes sense because we're talking about learners. And the workforce expectations are on higher level activities. And that's why we needed to go beyond the curriculum frameworks to see how the content is matching at the employer end. Okay, so this is a 3-layer radar chart, and we use this because we're very interested in the overlap, and we wanted to see what the overlap content-wise was between the curriculum, the Florida Department of Ed AM curriculum framework, and the 2 competency models. And so, as you can see, there is a great deal of overlap, but some interesting differences. And so, the curriculum framework is the blue layer. The competency model from 2010 is the orange layer, and the 2020 competency model is the green layer. And we kept both competency models in here because we're assuming that not everybody rushed and redid all of their syllabi as soon as January 2020 came and that new competency model came out. So this just kind of gives you a more complete picture. And so while there's a fair bit of overlap, as you can see here, the competency models emphasize activities that fall into Bloom's evaluating and analyzing categories, and the curriculum framework emphasis applying. And so let's look at the particular verbs. So leaving the curriculum frameworks behind, we're just looking at the competency models here and looking at the actual verbs that are in there, not the verb categories, but the actual verbs. And so why are we comparing them? And again, because we're assuming that not everybody is immediately rewriting their syllabi to reflect the 2020 framework. So, let's have a look here. All right, hang on one second. There we go. I'm sorry, my Bluetooth just died on me there. And so this is a grouped bar chart, and the blue bars are the 2020 competency model, and the pink bars are the 2010 competency model. And so the top 20 verbs in the 2020 model, as you can see here, they are compared to the pink. And so the verbs identify and use, which are in blue, are the top 2 verbs in the 2020 competency model, while use, maintain are the top verbs in the 2010 competency model. So note the pink bars off to the right. Those are verbs that appear in the 2010 competency model, but do not appear in the 2020 competency model as is the case with the blue bars that have no pink next to them. And so what's interesting to see here is that there are some high-level verbs in 2010 that are missing from 2020. And then we see some interesting verbs that appear in 2020 that did not appear in 2010. And we're still trying to kind of figure out how those verbs might fit into a measurable competency. So now let's add in the syllabi. So we've gotten a sense of what's in the competency models. And the 2020 competency model has overall some higher level verbs. But let's have a look at what the 2010, or what the syllabi, how the syllabi compare. And so from left to right here, you have the actual verb, not the verb category, the percentage of occurrence in all syllabi, the percentage of occurrence in the competency model, and the percentage of occurrence in the 2010 competency model. And we ask you to focus on the percentages here because, of course, the documents contain different numbers of verbs overall. So proportion is really probably the better way to represent things for comparative reasons. And so what we see is in these three documents, identify and use were very frequently used verbs. Although the most frequently used verb in the syllabi, if you look on down to line 14, is demonstrate. So let's stop and think about the prevalence of the word use. And so I'm going to run on over here, and I see that Al posted a comment.
Well, I was going to ask a question right quick, if that's okay.
Al, I think you had a comment. It's not showing up in my chat.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question about the verbs, if I may, or should I just wait?
Marcia, can you hear Al? Marcia?
I don't think she can hear us, guys. So let me see what I can do. Hold on. Let me see if I could just chat.
Okay.
Marcia.
And I can't hear any of the conversation that's going on.
Cannot hear us.
I can't hear you at all.
Okay, I'll try to
You
chat.
can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yes. Al was asking question and we'll chat. Send chat.
Okay, I can hear you now. Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. So Al, did you want to try again?
Yeah, I'll try again. Marcia, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, the question I had, and it kind of goes with this chart and plus the one that we just used, just went over, where you had some verbs that were not in 2010, but they're there now, but we're still unclear on how we're going to measure them. So who is creating or who is suggesting that we use these verbs if we're not sure on how to measure them?
Well, right. So this is very interesting because the Department of Labor, the way that they define competency would be in the same way that you would define competency, which would be something that is measurable. And so we were a bit perplexed to see verbs showing up in the 2020, the most recent competency model, that are going to be very difficult to distill into measurable competencies. It puts a lot of burden on you. One of the things that we noticed when we looked at the 2020 competency model is that even though they use the same process to create it, the actual competencies don't always look the same. For example, sometimes the competencies are just a noun and there's no verbs there. Sometimes the competencies are include something like support, which might be really difficult to measure. So I think that for people trying to look at the competency model in 2020 as representing what employers are looking for within their employees, there's going to have to be a deeper discussion about what that means.
Okay.
Marcia, can I just add too, and I just wanted to clarify that these are the top 20 verbs for each of the sides. So it could be, for example, that, you know, the top 20 in one was not the top 20 in the other document. Not that they weren't in the documents, but that they just weren't more prevalent in those documents. So it could have been that one of the verbs was number 50 in one, you know, one model versus the other. But again, it suggests and talks about the prevalence of those verbs in each of the documents. So it's not that the word understand, for example, in pink was not in the BOK. It could have been in the BOK, but it was just not among the top 20. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay. Yeah, I'm not quite sure why my ability to hear you dropped out, but your ability to hear me did not. That's interesting. Okay, so just finishing up here that on this one. So, you know, one thing that we talked about a lot is stopping and thinking about the prevalence of the word use. And so use is prevalent across all three documents. And we were just wondering, use seems like a verb that can be implied in many different situations, and how that might be measured in different situations. And so that's something that we wanted to put out to all of you, which is, you know, some verbs are more measurable than others. And so perhaps the word use might not always be the most precise word for the particular activity, but nonetheless, it seems to be a popular word. And so when you look across the other verbs, do you see any others that might be hard to measure? Something like need or seek, something like that. And these are the places where verbs can kind of cue you that you need to take a closer look at the competencies in the syllabi, as well as what employers expect, and maybe press a little bit on precision there. Okay, and so here we have another three-layer radar chart, again, because we wanted to show overlap between the syllabi and then the competency models. And this is probably something that is more interest to you than just knowing how the competency models overlapped. And so in this chart, we're comparing verbs in the syllabi to the 2010 and 2020 competency models according to Blue's revised taxonomy level. And again, the blue denotes the combined syllabi, the orange denotes the 2010 competency model, and the green represents the 2020 competency model. And so the syllabi are focused on lower level verbs, remembering, understanding, and applying. And I think that that's an echo of the curriculum frameworks. And then the 2010 and 2020 competency model shifts more toward the higher level verbs, the analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So I think, again, this makes sense for a learning environment, but it does beg the question of where students are going to get the experience to close the gap between the lower level verbs and the higher level verbs. How does that transition occur? And again, this is something for program leaders to think about, and perhaps there's a role there for experiential learning, but I think that there is something here that an awareness needs to be registered, that there is this difference between what people graduate knowing and being able to do and what employers are expecting people to know and be able to do, and how can we best close that gap. And so in these stacked bar charts, this is where we're visualizing the differences between all the college syllabi and the type of syllabi. And so that's, remember when I talked earlier about our process, that we also broke it out into core technical and elective technical, and the 2020 competency model. And so here what we see is that high level verbs do seem to appear to appear more frequently in the technical elective syllabi than in the technical core syllabi. So that's something to note. the balance between introductory material and coverage, I think, is something also that needs to be tracked very carefully, because if employers are expecting higher level competencies than programs can deliver in core curriculum courses, then maybe that's a place to be thinking about adjustments. So this graphic really highlights the needs for employers looking for higher level competencies than are what is expressed in the syllabi, but also shows that elective curricula have a higher percentage of verbs belonging to creating category than core technical syllabi. And so what do you think our takeaway should be about this findings? Anybody have any thoughts about that?
Am I allowed to cheat, Marcia, and chip in?
Sure.
Yep, I'm looking now at the AM competency model, the 2020, and the prevalence of those higher level verbs. That pretty much sticks out to me. I'm not sure if it does to anyone else compared to the other SACs that you're showing.
That's definitely one takeaway for sure. Yep. So we thought this was interesting too, because that whole notion of where to place the competencies is really tricky. And just knowing that from the areas in which we are subject matter experts. And so it's just a provocative thought to throw out there for everybody to consider. And again, you have all these slides in your packet, so you can certainly peruse them at greater length. And so we're not going to spend a lot of time here on topics that is nouns. We'll look at those a lot more this afternoon, because we haven't fully aggregated them and de-identified them, but it's worth looking at the most frequent verb noun combinations or bigrams. And again, this is the top 20. And so we're able to tell, just so you know, we're able to tell the part of speech based on the position of the words in the sentence. So we're able to determine, for example, when understanding is a verb and when understanding is a noun. Like if you look at the bar on the furthest right there. So consistent with the previous findings showing demonstrate, you'll remember demonstrate is the most frequent word in the syllabi. It's really probably no surprise that the most frequent occurring bigram was demonstrate knowledge, but also we had other combinations of demonstrate in various topics. Demonstrate proficiency, demonstrate skills, demonstrate understanding. So bigrams are closer to complete competencies. So it's worth asking, I think, at this point. When you look at these combinations, how might an employer recognize a professional with these competencies? If somebody can, I think some of them are really easy, like cut threads, I think is one that strikes me as very easy to identify. But something like demonstrating proficiency, and maybe that's more of an existential question for you to consider, but just as we move closer in the syllabi to having complete competencies that we're looking at, the idea of how they can be measured, but how they can be even demonstrated or shown to an employer is something that is worth consideration. So our lingering questions here, we tried to distill down into 3 key learnings, and what we kept running into were more questions than answers. And so some thoughts that we had that we wanted to throw out here for discussion were things about verb choice. And so thinking about how a competency is going to be measured. So use, as I talked about earlier, use can mean a lot of different things. And so how can the precision of the competency really be honed so that it's more easily measurable? And something like know, how is that something that you can measure, perhaps with a test, with the certification, something like that. Also, another question that kept coming up was, are there different levels of that mastery that are achievable as well? Or are we thinking all in terms of binary assessment? And so if the curriculum frameworks, so the third question we kept coming back to, if the curriculum frameworks are the starting point, how is the program prepared to track and respond to the needs and successes at the endpoint? And that's not just employment, but that's also alumni engagement. And that's really tricky to do. And so if you were here last year when we focused on employer interviewing, I know that many of you have established ways of engaging with your employers, but is that established way something that allows you to really quickly track and respond to the needs and the success at the endpoint? And how do alumni fit into that also? And so the next question we kept coming back to, and I think this is relevant to the last couple slides we looked at, is not all knowledge can be in core courses. It's just simply not possible, or else people would be taking 48-hour degrees. And so what is that right balance between high level and low level content? And then perhaps this needs to be the focus of the employer conversations. And then also something we kept coming back to as well, and I can tell you is already coming out in the interviews transcripts that I've looked at, is a role of experiential learning. And the new professionals who say that they had a lot of on-the-job learning to do in their first year or so on the job. So what role might there be for that in there? And I know that in this time of COVID, talking about internships is really a difficult topic because what those look like is certainly under question right now. So those were the kinds of thoughts that we had as for our high level findings here. Are there any comments or thoughts? And I think I can hear you now. Maybe I can't.
Yeah, this is Al. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Al.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I see is truly trying to come up with the measurements that our employers are asking for in the timely manner that they're wanting it, and especially since what they need changes all the time. And I think some of their changes today related to dealing with COVID makes them think about more of what they think they want, and they have no freaking idea of what they really want going forward. But they want us to help them come up with that. So that's a challenge on our part to give them what they want and for us to try and figure out what they'll need in the future. And that's difficult, especially with some of these verbs that we have no idea how to quantify or analyze for them. It's going to be an interesting task, education and the private sector, more so than it has been.
Well, I think that you are so right on so many levels. I mean, that's why this is not a neat close-ended kind of analysis that I think we may have been expecting going into it. But there are lots of issues relating to when we did, you may remember that what we first did in the first year of this project is we went around and we asked various programs for their origin stories. What was the catalyst for your program's creation? And for some programs we heard is that there was a specific industry in the area that really was experiencing a shortage of adequately prepared people and wanted to work closely with the programs to create kind of a pipeline of prepared people to go into their particular industry. And that being able to balance that tailoring with something that's a little bit broader is also, I imagine, another tension that you have to be cognizant of, because if you're constantly, serving one particular industry, what happens if that industry leaves your area? Then you have a bunch of workers that are trained for an industry that doesn't exist anymore. And so there are just so many layers of complexity to this, and the assessment being one of them, but the rapid change is another thing that I imagine is really challenging to stay on top of.
Yeah, and somebody just sent me a question about how can employers articulate what they want. And I'm not sure they really understand how to do that, because now their environment has changed. And how many of the smaller manufacturing companies have chosen to postpone technology and now wishing they haven't, and they're trying to figure out what that balance is, from capital acquisitions to getting the technology, training themselves, So it's a very cumbersome task that we have in front of us to not only deal with the smaller manufacturing companies, but the larger ones as well.
And how that trickles down to actually doing the particular jobs. And that's why last year when we talked a lot about employer interviewing, one of the big takeaways that we hoped everybody had gotten is just not that we came up with a better way of doing interviewing, but just raising the awareness that the interviews need to be very strategic.
Yes.
It's very, I know it's very engaging to let employers just sort of like come and invent their wish list to you, but you know, there's something very specific you need from them and need to get from them. But also sometimes what employers think they need and what the people who are actually doing the job say is happening, what those barriers are pretty far apart as well.
Al, this is Chuck McClure. And I'm the guy who asked that question about how well employers could articulate what they want. And one of the things that we have found over the years working in this area is what you said, which is they find it really difficult to specify what it is they want. And actually worse than that is that when you look at the job ads that they post and then get back and talk to them, they really then disavow some of the stuff they put into job posts.
Yeah,
and
that's
say,
true.
yeah, that's not really what I wanted, but that's what, you know, we ended up writing. So I think it's a big mess, quite frankly, is that, you know, what we keep finding out one way or another is that employers would, in the best of all worlds, want to have a 3-month intern, or so that they can determine whether this person really is who they want or not, as opposed to hiring them and hoping that they get what they want. And since they don't always know what it is they want, having an intern or some kind of experiential experience helps them to determine if the person is what they want, because they don't know what they want, if that made any sense to you.
Oh, I do. And that's one of the things we're struggling when we're trying to figure out how to better apply even this initiative that we have going on now, and then some Department of Labor grants and apprenticeships and everything else. They're starting to kind of come full circle because there's an understanding and a belief, and I kind of feel this way as well, that the more we can get a potential employee involved with the employer, the better off everyone's going to be. But there's still some pushback behind because of the historical perspective of what apprenticeships mean and internships mean and all that stuff back in the day. So it's going to be an interesting evolution, but it's got to be more revolutionary than evolutionary, or somebody's going to get left behind.
Faye, you've been doing a lot of work with the whole experiential learning process. Maybe you want to comment some here.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly the role of experiential learning, and we know that it matters, right? And I also know that as we've been interviewing new professionals, and Marcia indicated this as well, you know, just how much they value that experiential learning opportunity. They get to meet employers, they might have a job at the conclusion. Got a lot of people who said that because of that experiential learning opportunity, they were able to get a foot in the door to that next job opportunity.
Right.
Or because of that experiential learning opportunity, they were able to look at this manufacturing location versus that and kind of get an idea of what worked for them. So definitely the new professionals are starting to say, and we can kind of hear this as a theme, that they would like to see more industry / you know, education related partnerships, so that they can continue to participate in these opportunities and kind of get a leg up for that next step into their careers.
Yeah.
And I also remember that some of our participants have scholarships that go unused, internship opportunities that go unfilled. So there's a disconnect happening somewhere around the importance of these opportunities.
Thanks, Faye.
There's definitely a lot here to dig into. And I think that Faye, you had an additional comment that you wanted to share with the group about competency models.
Well, yeah, I guess because, you know, it's so difficult to get at the pulse of where employers are because of what I was saying. I mean, this is a very dynamic environment. Things change. It involves technology and advances to technology and those types of things. And quite frankly, sometimes employers are not very good at explaining what it is that they want. You have to kind of pull it out of them. But at least we do have the AM competency model. It does change every 10 years. And quite frankly, we're now at a 2020 competency model. Perhaps we at least need to make sure that we are aligned to these types of policies that employers themselves have built. And at least, I don't know, is this a basis for alignment for us to consider changes to what we do in education, or is it not? And so just something to throw out there.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, the 2020 competency model, I need to spend even more time with, because the competency, the approach to articulating competencies is different. And I think that there may be some challenges in operationalizing a competency that's just a noun, for example. So there's a lot more thinking and looking to do there. And I think it would be very interesting for us to see if we could track down the expert panelists who contribute to that and find a little bit more about the thinking that's not very transparent when you actually look at the competency model. And so if that's representing what employers are needing right now, that's something that's important. So I think that one of the things that we are coming out of this knowing is that the new professional perspectives, which is not a student perspective and it's not an employer perspective, really is some advice that is worth getting. And we understand that tracking down alumni is very difficult, but that certainly what we're learning from these conversations seems to be the interesting thread connecting the two areas that we've been looking at. So the other big takeaway, and we didn't talk too much in the past couple of years about job postings, is that the way in which AM jobs are, the awareness of and the availability of AM jobs is publicized is very different than it is in some other industries like IT, for example. Tends to be a much more handshake relationship, much more of a word of mouth situation. And from that standpoint, it's really hard to capture what employers are looking for through their job postings. And what we have learned is that job postings tend to be written to replace the person who left, not replace the person, what the job may become in the future. And so that's something else. So that there's a conversation that can be had with employers. But again, those analyses are underway, and certainly we'll be able to comment on the outcomes of those analyses in the coming months when we'll be sending out reports and updates. And so none of this work would have been possible without the tireless work of 4 out of the 5 people on this slide. And so just really Priyanka, Pallavi, Shravali, and Faye really worked very hard behind the scenes, and were very agile in redoing some analyses once the 2020 model came out so that we would have some comparisons. And so the work is still very much underway. And as I said, we're moving into the computational linguistic piece. But this methods team worked tirelessly through COVID, because now we're doing it all remotely. Priyanka had a baby, husbands are working in other cities. Pallavi got hired by Amazon all of a sudden, and balancing myriad other demands. So really, I hope that the slides in this packet were helpful to you, and that you enjoy their published output and find that interesting. So in terms of what's coming up next, for this work. And so, as I mentioned, we have so much more to do. We have completed our interviews with the 3 stakeholder groups, which we're breaking down to analyze to compare with the syllabi in the Department of Labor model. And we have, we're continuing to track the identified competencies not found in the Department of Labor models to enhance the body of knowledge. And so one of the reasons why we're doing this also is we really feel like having a conversation about professionalism and professionalization of engineering technicians really might be one way to help draw more people into the profession, and certainly get more attention on the importance of having a clarity of what people are supposed to know and be able to do. And so we'd love to continue to engage you in this work through our reports, through other products, through conversations. And we're moving into a phase where we also need to know what it will take to sustain the impact of this work, along the lines of what Margie did. How can we help you use these findings to make change? And so we do have a few moments to answer any additional questions, or if there was something you wanted to know or you expected to find out from this presentation that you didn't, if we might be able to address that for you, we're certainly happy to do that.
Marcia, can you go back one slide to the to some of the findings that you had? Well, yeah, I like that, the picture too, but that one, the lingering questions. I just wanted to highlight that that first point that you made about verb choice, and why is, well, first we found that use, right, is well, use a whole lot. And so why did you say that that was problematic? Could you talk a little bit more about that, and maybe, I mean, what we could do to fix that or to improve that?
Well, so if you take it, for example, a bigram, like, let's look at the bigrams here and see if we have a use one in here. So we do have a use one in here, use Mastercam. So use Mastercam might mean that you know how to turn the Mastercam on. Use Mastercam might mean that you can use the Mastercam to create something. It might mean that you can use the Mastercam to solve a problem. And so perhaps in that case, if you have a competency that is use Mastercam something, being sure that that competency can't be reworded to be more effective, like solve problems using the Mastercam, or use Mastercam to solve problems, that at least the way in which use is intended to be implemented is clear from the entire competency, rather than something like, I think, use drawings or use blueprints. There's a number of different ways that you can do that. You can use them to audit, you can use them to assess, you can use them to as instructions to build. So just making sure that with something as broad as use, that the rest of the competency illustrates what the intended outcome is, and that it is something that's measurable. And we were not necessarily seeing that in all of the uses of use.
Yep, thank you for adding that. I think that alone could be something that, you know, others can take with them and implement.
All right, well, at this juncture, we are going to be around all afternoon for questions. And so what our plan is now is, ordinarily we would all be wandering over to the beautiful Chipola cafeteria, having a delicious lunch. But we're sad to say today, you had to make your own breakfast and you got to make your own lunch. We have no coffee for you, no pop, no nothing. So you're on your own, folks. But we're so grateful for the stakeholders who came this morning. This afternoon, we're hoping our college partners, and who we're referring to as our critical friends, and so that would be Marilyn Barger, Bob Levins, and Will Tyson, will stay with us for some deeper looks into the individual college reports. And if you're not able to, that's fine. We're just hoping that you would be available. And that's what's on for the afternoon. And otherwise, I thank you so much for your generous contribution of time to us this morning. And keep your email eyes open because you'll be seeing more from us. Thank you so much.